Hey everyone, and welcome back to Music Appreciation. Today we're looking at chapter 31, The Elfking by the composer Franz Schubert. Returning again to our music history timeline, we first introduced the Romantic era last week when we looked at Beethoven's famous Fifth Symphony. And so that was from the year 1808, so kind of introduced us to the 19th century or the Romantic era. To recap that meaning, the word romantic actually comes from the root word, the Latin root word roman, which means novel. So today we often think about the word romantic as referring to romantic love, but actually it had a meaning surrounding the word novel, meaning that we were emphasizing storytelling, something a narrative, something very autobiographical, which of course lends itself to great personal expression and intense emotion. So you can kind of see how that might lead into eventually thinking of romanticism as referring to love. So some of the themes that we'll see in our romantic music that lends it this narrative, emotional feeling would be themes on love, death, nature, the supernatural, and that can refer to either religion or to kind of otherworldly ghosts and spirits, isolation, and nationalism. So we'll see several of those in the Elfking today. So the Elfking by Schubert is a new genre that we have not yet heard before, and it is the genre of the Lied. So this is a German word. It's pronounced as though it were spelled L-E-E-T. So it looks like lied in English, but it's German, so it's Lied. And in the plural, it's referred to as Lieder. So this is the German word that means art song. And of course, we're all familiar with songs today, and you think about pop music from today, that refers to generally like one person singing sort of a solo, and then they've got some like kind of band backing them up, and it tends to be about 3 to 5 minutes long. So in that same sense, it's very similar here. Although our setup for a romantic lied would be a solo voice plus a piano accompaniment. So I have a picture of a modern day performance of a lied. So the solo singer right here who would be carrying the main melody, and then he's being accompanied here by a pianist. So this would lend itself to a homophonic texture, meaning we've got one main melody plus accompaniment, so there's some sort of hierarchy. So in Romantic Lied, we will see German poetry that has been set to music. So oftentimes it's even older German poetry that a composer sort of pulls out and sets it to music, writes a song to use that poetry as the lyrics. Today's Lied for chapter 31 is one of the most, it's an early example of this genre, but it's still one of the most famous and widely performed, and it's called the Elfking. You might also see it referred to in the textbook or, on the internet as the Erlking or the Erlkönig. So Erlkönig is the original German term for it. Erlking is sort of a in-between version, but for our purposes here, I'll just use the English translation of Elfking. So the story of the Elfking is actually a very old sort of mythological tale, or sort of like a fairy tale from the Middle Ages, and it tells the story of the Elfking, who is sort of an evil goblin ghoul type creature who feeds off of children's souls. So he often steals children's souls in the middle of the night, and only children can see him. Adults cannot. So it's a pretty dark tale that's been told many different ways, but the Lied that we're listening to today by Schubert is drawn from a poem written by the famous German poet Goethe. And Goethe tells the story, as depicted here, of a child being abducted by the Elfking in the middle of the night from horseback. So it's set up that we've got a young boy and his father riding on horseback in the middle of the night through the woods. It's kind of a blustery, chilly, windy night. And suddenly the Elfking appears to the child, and of course his father can't see it. And the child calls out to his father repeatedly, "Father, father, the Elfking is here, save me." And the father keeps trying to reassure the son, "Don't worry, it's just the wind in the trees, it's just the leaves rustling." And eventually the Elfking succeeds in stealing the boy's soul, and leaves the boy dead. So it's quite a dark, kind of scary tale, but there is a great story going on there as well. It's very romantic in that sense. Another thing that makes this unique is that we also have a narrator in this piece. So we hear from the narrator at the very beginning. He's the first person we hear, and he's the last person that we hear. So he introduces the setup to us, and then he kind of gives us the epilogue at the very end. So that also lends itself to being very novelistic. Now again, if you recall, this genre involves one single soloist plus a piano accompaniment, but according to the plot of this particular work, we actually have four characters. We have the father, we have the son, we have the Elf King, and then we also have the narrator. But all four of these different characters have to be portrayed by one singer. So it's pretty involved there. It requires quite a bit of vocal agility and talent. So here I've provided the English translation because of course it's originally in German. So we get the narrator. Who rides so late through night and wind? It's the father with his child. He has the young boy safe in his arms. He holds him tightly. He keeps him warm. And then the father says, "My son, why are you hiding? Why are you frightened?" And the son says, "Don't you see, father, the Elf King in his crown and robes?" And the father says, "Oh, it's just a wisp of fog." And then we hear after that from the Elf King. And the Elf King at first tries to be sweet. He tries to kind of lure the boy away, tempt him away. "You sweet child, come with me. We'll play beautiful games. There are beautiful flowers, golden clothes." But the son's not falling for it. He's still scared. He says, "Father, father, you don't hear what the Elf King is saying?" And the father still can't see the Elf King. He says, "Hush, stay quiet. It's just the wind and the leaves." So the Elf King tries again to tempt the boy away. "Do you want to go with me? My daughters will wait on you. We'll spoil you. We'll dance and sing." And again the son is saying, "Father, father, can you not see the Elf King? He's trying to get me." And again the father tries to reassure him. It's just the old willow trees. So the Elf King is starting to get angry now. And so he says, I love you, come with me." And I know the lyrics right there sound a little bit strange to us, but it's a German translation. And so he starts out trying to sound kind of sweet to lure him away, but then he loses his patience. "And if you're not willing to go with me, I'll use force." And so we get a change in character from the Elf King right there. And at that point, the Elf King captures the boy, and the son says, "Father, he's got me, he's hurt me." And then the narrator tells us what happened. By the time they reach home, the child is dead. So that's, it's very much a small novel told in poetry form right there. We've got different characters conversing with one another. And so I'm going to play you some excerpts here of this next, but what I want you to pay attention to especially is the way that Schubert is able to convey multiple characters within one single singer. So the narrator at the beginning and the end is going to be sort of a neutral voice. He's in a minor key, which is a darker key, versus major, which tends to sound much happier and lighthearted. And he's in a middle vocal range, so his voice isn't too deep, but it's not too high. The father, on the other hand, is going to be in a minor key as well, but he'll be in a low range. It's a very deep, kind of booming, reassuring voice, right? He's our father figure who's supposed to be protecting the child. The son also in a minor key, he's very scared, and his voice is going to be in a higher range because he's a young boy with a higher pitched voice. And the Elf King is particularly interesting because he's the only character who will be singing in a major key. And again, he's at first trying to be sweet and to tempt the boy away, so that major key gives us this sort of fake feeling of innocence. And he will also be singing in a middle range. All right, so now I'm going to switch over to the sheet music here and play you a couple examples. Again, I don't expect you to be able to read music, but I've made some notations here in the music itself that can kind of give you the sense of a shape of a line, the contour and range of a melody, which is still helpful. So now right here at the very beginning, we're going to hear a piano, and I'm going to be playing these excerpts for you on my violin. So at the very beginning here, we've got a piano solo. It's the introduction. And right off the bat, we hear these sets of what are called triplets. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. They move very fast, and they sound frantic. And this figure pervades the entire work. We never ever can escape this. It continually repeats this rhythm throughout the entire piece. So now I'll play you a second of that here. So that's what it sounds like. And this can be interpreted in different ways. It could sound like a heartbeat pounding quickly out of fear, or it could sound like the galloping hooves of a horse. And of course, you're on horseback running through the forest. Underlying that, we have these brief fragments in the bass line of the piano that sound very sinister. It almost sounds like something that could be out of a modern day spy movie. So right off the bat, we get a sense of unease and tension and fear. So of course, the first thing we're going to hear from our first person is the narrator. And he says, "Who's writing so late?" It's a father with his son. He's setting up the scene for us. So he's got a neutral voice, nothing too emotional. So this is what he sounds like. Is asking a question right there. And then the next person that we hear from is the father, who asks his son why he's hiding. Why are you afraid, my son? So the father's voice is going to be in a deeper, lower range. And I've also indicated with an arrow here a rising end to this phrase, to this question. And of course, when you're asking a question in your normal speaking voice, our voices naturally rise upwards at the end of the phrase. So, my son, why do you cover your face? Your voice naturally rises, right? Whereas when you're making a declarative statement, your voice tends to move downwards at the end of that phrase. So here's the father's first question. So it moves upwards there. And next the son responds, "Do you not see the Elf King, father?" He's also asking a question, so I've indicated that here with an upward arrow. And his voice sort of moves downwards and upwards, this inflection that sounds a little bit afraid or uneasy. So here's the son's question and response. And he's in a much higher range because he's a younger boy, of course. And next he says, "He's near, the king of elves, they're coming." And the father tries to reassure him, "My son, it's only the mist." So he's going to be in a deeper range, and this time, as indicated by the arrow, his line is going to descend because he's making a declarative statement. Sort of a reassuring, calming response there. So next we're going to hear for the first time from the Elf King himself. And again, he's going to be in a higher range and he will have a major key. So he's going to sound, this is going to be a beautiful kind of light-hearted melody, sort of a deceptively beautiful, innocent sounding melody. And he says, "Sweet child, come and join me, we'll play wonderful games." So that melody alone might not sound like a murderous goblin, but that's exactly what it is. But the boy doesn't fall for it. He says, "My father, can you not hear the Elf King?" So he's getting more insistent. His voice gets even higher in range. And again, it's that ascending line moving upwards because he's answering a question. So you should hear the fear in his voice as it gets even more moving upwards in a higher range. The father once again reassures him, "Be calm, it's only the leaves." So the Elf King next tries again in a beautiful melody. "Come with me, my daughters will take care of you, we'll dance and we'll sing." I'm going to move down here a little bit. Now the son is very afraid. He says one more time, "Father, you don't see the Elf King." Even more insistent this time with that rising line. The father once again replies, "It's just the trees." So now the Elf King is angry. He says, "I love you, but if you're not going to come willingly, then I'll take you by force." So the first entrance here sounds soft and beautiful in a major key. But he says, "But if you're not coming, I'll take you by force." Sorry, let me move downwards a little bit. And he gets mad right there. So now the Elf King has succeeded. The son cries out one more time. But it's too late for the son, sadly. So now our narrator enters in and lets us know at the very end what has happened to the child. So that was just a quick overview of the plot line of this and some of the main melodies. So next I'd like you to please listen to, on your own, this piece through the MyLab recordings for chapter 31, so that you can hear it along with the singing, of course, and also the piano. So I hope you enjoyed this very romantic German art song, and thank you very much for listening.